2 Samuel chapter 16. Hope you're doing all right. Good to see you tonight. Thanks for coming. We continue our study here. As you turn in there to 2 Samuel 16. I really enjoy Brother LeBeau on Sunday. His singing and the preaching and just his overall joy and mood is just very, very gratifying and sometimes even convicting, if I can be honest. Just his overall spirit and what he has as far as not letting things get him down is a blessing. It's always a blessing to be with him. As we come tonight to this topic tonight, we're looking at friends and enemies. And as we continue looking at 2 Samuel 16 and 17, the hymn we sang tonight was What a Friend We Have in Jesus. I'm going to read a little bit of it. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? And ask yourself that question. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? And I think if you've been following with us, I think David could say the answer to that question is yes. I mean, David, as we look at in Scripture here, as we've gotten up to this point, David and Absalom are not just have friction, they're at odds with each other. And they're separated now. There's an obvious standoff, conflict between David and his son Absalom. And so, as David has now fled the throne, and that's kind of just a weird thought, isn't it? The whole time as we've been studying this over the months is we've got David and we got Saul, and that's kind of like David, we want to put David on the throne, and waiting for God's timing, and then God and his providence removes Saul, and then David becomes king, and different things that happen, and as we see here, now his own son Absalom wants him dead. And sometimes it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that and make it real, instead of making it a story. To think about one of your own children being so bitter against you, and honestly, David's not an innocent man by any stretch of the means, but we feel too sorry for David. Feel like, hey, I'm going to get him. I would like to, see his life end. But someone once said, if you could put on one hand, or more than one hand, your friends in life, your good friends, then you got to consider yourself a blessed person. And I'm not talking about Facebook friends. I'm not talking about all of those, okay? You say, well, on Facebook, I got 1,742 friends. You don't have that many friends. I would say acquaintances, and I looked at sometimes Facebook, I'm like, do I even know these people? Like, they're my friend. I don't really know. But when we talk about friends, we're talking about those people that are there with you through thick and thin. Those people that will be faithful to you in the times of trouble, those that are there for you in your greatest moment of need, those that will be self-sacrificing to help you, whether it's to get your life turned around, whether it's to bring conviction to your life, or whether it's just to be there in that moment of need when you need them the most. And David's at a point in his life where David has friends and David has enemies. But honestly, it's kind of hard to tell up to a certain point. And I think some of the people that we're going to look at tonight, we're going to look at 4 people in chapters 16 and 17. Some of y'all I know are like, Phil, that's a lofty goal for you, 2 chapters, but we'll try to see what we can do here, okay? But we're going to see some people in David's life that are part of David's life at some point or another. And we're going to see, are they friends or they enemies? Because this is the time you need a friend. And the conflict, as we finished up last week, just to give you an idea, David has had to flee. He's walking barefoot. This is the king of Israel. He is walking barefoot, head down, leaving Jerusalem because Absalom has stolen the hearts of the people, as it says, over a course of 4 years, and Absalom is going to return to Jerusalem to claim the throne and eventually to try to kill his own father. And if you remember, as we kind of ended last week, we see as David is leaving, and David is so discouraged. David, remember, all this stuff is going on, and in fact, David has these people at the end of chapter 15, Zadok and Abiathar. These are 2 priests. They're saying, we're going to take the Ark of the Covenant with us. And David said, no, you turn around and go back, and you guys are going to help me as far as knowing what's going on with Absalom and with everything going on. And And even this idea that he has finally in verse 31 of chapter 15, it says, and David prayed. And so David prayed, and I believe that prayer is described in detail in Psalm 3. And remember, as I always try to tell you, is that if you ever read the Psalms and try to wonder what they're about, what the context is, if you read Psalm 3 is David here where he is now, leaving the throne, basically running for his life from his son and all of those that have turned against him. And it says how he prayed and he took counsel with the Lord, and the Lord helped him. And even one of his head counselors, a guy named Ahithophel, who we've talked about a little bit, we're going to look at some more tonight. This guy's turned on him, everything. And then we kind of didn't get the opportunity, but we finished up by a guy by the name of Hushai. Hushai is a David's friend. In fact, you can see it at the very last verse. It says in verse 37 of chapter 15, it says, so Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and to Absalom came into Jerusalem. And so what happened is Hushai comes and says, David, I'm going to be with you. I'll go with you. I'll die with you. I'll fight for you. I'll do whatever. And David says, I need you to do me a favor. I need you actually go back and be a spy. In fact, Ahithophel, my main counselor, now has turned on me. So Hushai, I need you to go, and I need you to keep my son from taking Ahithophel's counsel. So that's where we're kind of at. So if that's clear as mud, I'm sorry. That's kind of where we're at, okay? But when we get to chapter 16, the conflict between David and Absalom is now kind of rekindled some old supporters of Saul. It's kind of rekindled some of those who were kind of nursing grudges, if you would, against David. And by the way, I want to try to apply as much of this as possible. But have you ever noticed that mean-spirited people will flat out just kick a person when they're down? You want to find out who an enemy is. Let someone be down and watch how those opportunists, if you will really just descend like vultures on somebody. Because up until this point, David had seemed invincible. David had seemed as untouchable. And yet the moment that he appears vulnerable, man, they just come right down on him. And what we're going to see here tonight, and I want you to kind of think about it maybe in your life. Maybe it's people in your life you wonder about. And we're going to see 4 people here. Maybe it'd be a help to us. And some of these names are fun, so I apologize. I'll just do the best I can. But we're going to see 4 people tonight as far as enemies and friends. And the first one is Ziba. Ziba is someone who deceives. Someone who deceives. And if you look in chapter number 16, verse number 1 through 4, okay, it says this, and when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him, and with him a couple of asses saddled, and upon 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, and 100 summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. And the king said unto Ziba, what meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, the asses or the donkeys be for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine that such be faint in the wilderness may drink. And the king, or David, said in verse 3, and where is thy master's son? And Ziba said unto the king, behold, he abideth at Jerusalem. For he said, today shall the house of Israel restore me, or restore to me the kingdom of my father. Then said the king to Ziba, Behold, thine are all that pertaineth unto Mephibosheth. And Ziba said, I humbly beseech thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, my lord, O king. All right, so David has fled, and as David is fleeing, a man comes up to him by the name of Ziba. We have seen Ziba before, back in chapter number 9. If you remember the story in chapter number 9, remember who did David love? I mean, loved as a brother in arms was Jonathan, right? Saul's son. And if you remember, Jonathan's dead, Saul's dead, chapter 9 of 2 Samuel, it says this, and David says, is there anybody in the house of Saul? Is there anybody left, now that I'm king, is there anyone still alive that I could show grace to, that I could show mercy to? And someone said, well, Jonathan actually had a son. His name is Mephibosheth, but he's crippled. And really, what good is he going to be to you? It says that when he was young and the sound of war came, and it said that the nurse or the lady picked him up and started going, and as she went, she dropped him, and as she dropped him, he fell and he became crippled. And so he's the only one that's left. And if you remember, what does that wonderful story of grace, and such a wonderful, I really enjoy not just saying the name of Mephibosheth because it's a whole mouthful to say, but it's such a wonderful story of the grace of God. Here is, for David, here is not just Jonathan's son, but here's the grandson of your nemesis. And in those days, when a new king or a new family stepped in, you didn't show grace to any of the other family. You killed them. You eliminated them. And you got Mephibosheth here, has nothing to offer David, yet David shows him grace. And David says in chapter 9 of 2 Samuel, says to a man that we see here, Ziba, he says to him, you and your family shall work the fields of Mephibosheth, and you'll eat of those fields, but Mephibosheth shall eat at my table. And so you got Ziba here, and we're going to look about how he deceives, but that's what I just want you to understand. He's supposed to be working for Mephibosheth, and it says here, he comes to David, he's kind of got these donkeys and all these provisions and all these things for the troops, and David certainly needed the help, but here's the thing, Ziba's motives were less than pure. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had somebody want to do something for you, but they didn't have the right motive on why they did it? Like they wanted to be a help, you're in need, but they did it for selfish reasons. It's kind of like this. Have you ever been someone say, man, if I don't want to be indebted to that person. You know what I mean? Because that person's going to want this, and they're going to hold it over my head, or they're just going to deceive you in the process. And that's what Ziba was doing. And David certainly needed the help, but Ziba's motives were not really pure, if you would. And David had, by the way, up to this point, no reason when he saw Ziba to not believe him. And because here's why. You say, well, why does he not believe Ziba? Well, if Absalom, his own flesh and blood, could betray David, why not could his adopted son Mephibosheth betray him? Because if you look at, what does Ziba say? What does David say to Ziba? He said in verse 3, and where's thy master's son? He's saying, where's Mephibosheth? Why are you out here giving me food and things like that? Where's the one that you're supposed to be taking care of? And if you saw what Ziba did here, he said, oh, Mephibosheth, he heard you left. I'm just paraphrasing now. He stayed in Jerusalem. He heard that you left, and now with your son Absalom coming, he thinks now is going to be restored to him his rightful place. Now, to our knowledge, none of that's true. So he basically deceived David. He lied to David. And by the way, we don't really ever like to talk about it like this, but isn't that what lying is? It's deceiving somebody. We like to say, well, I didn't really lie to them. I just got them to believe something else. That's deceiving them. That's in the lying part there. And so, as you see here, Ziba says, oh, yeah, Mephibosheth's there, but I'm loyal to you, David. I'm loyal to you. But he did it with ulterior motives, and when he did this, and David had suffered so much betrayal that he just assumed, well, if Absalom's betrayed me, he just popped the story. By the way, I've been guilty of this, and you don't have to raise your hand because if you're like me, you probably have to raise both hands. Have you ever pronounced judgment on something before you heard the facts on both sides? Right? I mean, here's Ziba saying, Mephibosheth is doing this, so what does David ultimately go? I believe you, Ziba. If Absalom messed up, if Absalom betrayed me, surely Mephibosheth betrayed me. And come to the truth is, that wasn't even true. I think we do that sometimes when we get caught up in different things. And so ultimately he lies to David here because David's like, well, surely he's betrayed me just like Absalom had. And really the steward had abandoned his crippled master. Really what had happened is Ziba feared for his own life. And he left his crippled master Mephibosheth there with no way to leave. And so anyhow, and he tried to swindle him out of his property. And I have this in my notes. Can you remember ever feeling like someone took advantage of you at a moment that you were most vulnerable? Have you ever had a person in your life when you were probably at your most vulnerable take advantage of your situation? And by the way, nothing makes us as vulnerable as family problems. We have family problems. David is in the middle of a huge family conflict here. I think conflict's probably not the right word. Problems here. But can we tell you that personal difficulties and problems in our life could cause us a lack of discernment in our lives? Because here's the problem. David heard Ziba say that. And what does David do in verse 4? Ziba says, hey, he's betrayed you. I'm not betrayed you. And Ziba's deceiving. Ziba's lying. And so what does David do in verse 4? everything that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours, Ziba. Can we just say he kind of shot from the hip there on that? He kind of did a reaction, if you would, in that. And so David, in that moment, showed a lack of discernment and made a quick decision. By the way, can I just throw this out here a little bit? And I have to learn this myself. When we're stressed, when we're overwhelmed, when we have some certain issues in our life, the worst thing you can do in those moments is make absolutes as far as decisions. I mean, it's one of the worst things you can do when you're stressed out or when you're angry or when you feel betrayed. The worst thing you can do is make absolutes, okay? It's kind of like this. You're upset, you're stressed, and you know what you come back and say, well, it's over. Well, you're acting in an emotion. You're acting in a moment. And that's what you can't do. And here's what it is. Can I just tell you that David didn't have the right here, even as king, to strip everything from Mephibosheth. But here he is pronouncing something that before he knew the whole situation. And to me, I just see to myself, he's making a decision based off someone trying to deceive him. And I guess what I'm trying to get to is this, with Ziba. Be careful when you make decisions when there's people prompting you, and possibly consider, are they deceiving me? Are they trying to get something for their own good in the process of this? That's right. And we see this, and really, he just gives everything to Ziba here. And David's very vulnerable because he believed the worst and responded with haste rather than with prudence. And I just, like I said, we are wise to be careful about the decisions and assumptions we make when we're stressed. Here's the thing. There's a difference between reacting and responding. Okay? If you hit me in the face and I turn and smack you right back, I'm probably reacting. Okay? Like, or you hit someone on the knee and the knee goes up like that, that's a reaction there. But in our lives, here's the thing. To react normally is to give in totally to emotions and how we feel. To respond, hopefully, gives us the opportunity to say, God, what do I know? What am I trusting in? And now how can I act upon that? And that's the key to this. And understanding and the difference between reacting or something. But if we're all honest, reacting feels a lot better in the moment, doesn't it? I mean, in the moment, it feels a lot better. I can't tell how many times I've reacted, and for that split second or seconds later, I felt really good. To only later feel like, man, the kid that ate too much chocolate, like this is killing me. You know, like I'm just sick at my stomach about it. And I can tell you, I can't think of a situation when godly advice is more valuable than times when we're very vulnerable. And David here could have used a little advice before giving Mephibosheth's stuff away to Ziba. But here's the problem. Mephibosheth had a counselor. Who was his counselor? A guy by the name of Ahithophel. Remember? Ahithophel is his counselor. He's unturned on David. So now David's doing all of it on his own. And so here you are, David makes a wrong decision here. And so next we see this. We see not just Ziba who deceives, but we see Shimei who curses. Look in verse number 5 through 8. It says, and when David came to Bahurim, these are all fun words, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came forth and cursed still as he came, and he cast stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And thus said Shimei when he cursed, come out, thou bloody man, and thou man of Belial. The Lord hath returned upon thee all the blood of the house of Saul, and whose stead thou hast reigned. And the Lord hath delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom thy son. And behold, thou art taken in mischief, because thou art a bloody man. So here we got Shimei. Let me just tell you, we're going to have enemies in our life that are going to be very secretive. We're going to have enemies in our life that are very covert ops, so to speak. They're going to be very, just kind of, they're not going to be openly defiant. We're going to have those that deceive us. And then honestly, we're going to have some people like Shimei in our life. We're going to have people that just flat out curse us, that are against us. Now honestly, they both hurt, right? I mean, if you had this person that you thought was a friend, only to realize later they have deceived you, like Ziba did, that's very hurtful, it's an enemy. But honestly, if we're honest, I think we have people in our life that are just flat out, they're against us. They're against us. They curse us. And so what you kind of have happening here, on the heels of Ziba's claims about Mephibosheth, David encounters this profane, violent man named Shimei. And he begins just to cuss at David, throw stones at David. The stones hit him. I kind of wonder if the stones probably didn't hurt as bad as more than the things that he was saying. But the man's actions were wrong. But David kind of appeared the right. So basically, he's walking, and as he's walking, Shimei is throwing rocks, kicking up dust, throwing it on David. All of his servants cussing him, saying, "You're the one that killed Saul," basically is what he's saying. "You killed Saul. You killed David. God's given you exactly what you deserve." And he is just blasting him. By the way, wouldn't it be nice when we're down just to be able to send something and say, "Hey, right now is not a good time for those people that are against me to come out. If they give me like a 5-minute break, that would be great." But you don't see any break, do you? And so this guy's cussing at David. Can you imagine that? Cussing at David, throwing dirt at David, all of them throwing rocks, saying all these things that are incorrect about David. And then something happens here. I have a lot of favorite Bible characters. I put them in category. More known Bible characters, like I like Noah a lot. Noah's one of my favorite Bible characters. I like him a ton. A lot of other Bible characters that I like a lot. I like Ruth as a Bible character a lot, just the faith there. But also like lesser known Bible characters. And Abishai is probably my top, not very well known Bible character, because Abishai is just a guy I just think's pretty awesome. Okay, so just think about this for a moment. Kicking dirt on David, throwing rocks on David, cussing David, lying about David. And here is Abishai in verse 9. "Then said Abishai the son of Zeruiah unto the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, I pray thee, and take off his head." By the way, that's the friend I want, don't you? That's the friend you want. Someone's blasting you, and Abishai is sitting there going, "I can pretty much take his head off. Just look that way." All you got to do is just wink. David, you don't have to say yes. It's kind of a little bit. And I'll go over there. It won't take long. I will get rid of this noisy little cricket right here. I mean, and Abishai is standing there. And by the way, a lot of things about Abishai that are great. Abishai to me is kind of an Old Testament version of Peter. Peter, here comes the soldiers to get Jesus, and what's Peter do? Pull out the sword, start trying to chop off the head of the guy coming. Abishai's like, "David, love you. Let me kill him, please." I mean, this is not like, "Oh, let me fight him, let me shut him up. Let me take his head off of his shoulders." And so we're like, yeah. And so if you're like me, I want verse 10 to say, "And David said, take him out." That's what I want it to say, right? And that's what you want it to say. But look what David says. And the king says, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord hath said unto him, Curse David. Who shall say then, Wherefore hast thou done so?" And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my son, which came forth out of my bowels, or out of my body, seeketh my life. How much more now may this Benjamite do it? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord hath bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look on mine affliction, and that the Lord will requite or repay me good for his cursing this day." And as David and his men went by the way, Shimei went along on the hillside over against him, and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him, and cast dust. I tell you, man, at the beginning, I kind of get David, "Hey, man, just leave him alone." After he kept on doing it, I'd probably been like, "Where's Abishai at? Okay, I mean, enough's enough. Let's take care of him." But I find it very interesting here, and I think David feared that Shimei's words might be accurate, because when when Abishai wanted to kill Shimei, David said to him, "Don't do it, because it just might be the Lord has put him and purposed him there to do so." It just God may have put him there in that situation. And really, through all of David's ups and downs, his victories and his failures, this is really, if we're honest, this is one of the few times we've seen David walk through this kind of humiliation. I mean, all the things that David has done. This is really kind of that walk of humiliation and being piled on. This is really one of the first times we've ever seen that. And I want to associate it because, remember, we always associate David as a lesser king, but there was coming a greater king who is Christ. And if you think about Christ, Christ also walked that road of humiliation. You think about Christ as he went to the cross. He was spat on, he was slapped in the face, he was lied about, he was humiliated. Unlike David, though, Christ was completely innocent. You have to remember that about David. David was paying the price for some of his sins, but Christ didn't. If you remember Christ, he could have summoned the armies of heaven to order an earthquake to happen, to destroy the world. But if you remember what it says in Hebrews 12:2, for the joy that was set before him, speaking of Christ, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And I tell you, you say, well, how do I apply this to my life? I think all of us in our life, at one point or another, have people that are just openly defiant against us. We have people that they make no bones about it. They're there against you. But you have to ask yourself this question. Is this part of God's will and plan and purpose in my life? Is this part of him conforming me to the image of Christ? I tell you, so often I want to be like Christ, but do I want to walk the humiliation? I want to be like Christ, but do I want to be lied about? I want to be like Christ, but do I want to be cursed at in my life? And the answer to the question is, no, I don't want that. Nobody wakes up and says, man, I really hope somebody just lies about me and just tells me, just lays into me. No, we don't think that. But think about this. We could be in the middle of God's will and find ourselves on a path that is very humbling. Or we could be like David, and we could be suffering further humiliation because knowing it was a path that we chose. Remember, this is a path that David chose. It's a path David chose. You remember all through Scripture when David did certain things, it said, and David inquired of the Lord. Remember when David left the throne and decided to run? There is no mention there of David praying and asking God if he should run. He just did it. He let his circumstances dictate his outcome in those things. And the thing to understand is that God is still merciful to meet us on those humiliating paths of our lives, whether or not we chose to be there or not. I still think God meets us where we're at, whether we have placed ourselves there by our own choice or whether it's through his will. And the other thing to consider about Shimei, I think, is this, is consider the timing of Shimei's attack. I know it was last week we looked at it, but David just possibly even the day before, possibly, chapter 15, verse 31, had what? Just got a little bit of spark, right? He just got on his knees on top of the Mount of Olives and he prayed. We looked at the end of that last week. He had just gotten there where David prayed to the Lord. He put his care into the Lord. Like again, I said, Psalm 3 is kind of that prayer where he trusts in the Lord. Salvation belongs to the Lord. My deliverance belongs to the Lord in Psalm 3 as it talks about. And just as he's kind of regaining a little shred of strength there, Shimei attacks. And honestly, I think that's sometimes when Satan does that. He suspects we have a little bit of a spark of hope. And I think he hastens to greet us with discouragement and rejection. Discouragement and rejection in our lives. And again, I noticed David's response here in verse number 11 to Abishai's request, which again, I love Abishai's request. He doesn't just say, let me kill him. He's like, can I take his head off? But he says in the middle of verse number 11, what does he say? He's talking about his own son. He said, my son, who is what? From my own body seeks my life. And so I bet you David's almost saying, there's nothing anyone can do to injure me more deeply than what's going to happen. Let Shimei curse. Let him do it. And here's what David is saying. And this is the hard part. Maybe I deserve it. That's the part that I don't want to hear. Maybe I deserve it. And there's something I want to kind of express, and I put it on a thing here just in studying and reading. I thought it was pretty good. And I want you to try to, and I hope you'll receive this a little bit tonight, but I want you to see this, is that we can cry, or we can still cry out to God for help even when we think we're getting what we deserve. Because I dare say many of us in this room, we don't cry out to God because we feel guilty. We feel like we made our bed, I got to lie in it. But the problem is we can still cry out to God, and God can still meet us there whether we did this or not. You know, regardless of how deep my sin goes, the grace of God goes deeper. But what does my sin and my guilt always want me to do in my relationship with God? This is why I tell you there's a difference between guilt and conviction. Conviction pushes me back to Christ. Guilt makes me feel worthless and tells me it's not worth it, and I'm not worthy to even go to God. That's what guilt does. But see, that guilt makes me think, man, there's no need to pray. I deserve what I got. Well, maybe you do deserve the cursing. Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. But we can cry out to God for help even when we think we're getting what we deserve. We can still cry out to Him. We can cry out to Him, and God can come to us even when our pain is self-inflicted. We can still cry out to Him, and God will come to us. And really, times of humiliation and persecution, if I can be honest, they don't have to be permanent injuries. They can be injuries, but those times of humiliation and persecution in our life, they don't have to be permanent in our lives. And just to be honest, there's few experiences that are more exhausting than having to keep going forward when you feel like you're being attacked, especially if you feel like you're being attacked unjustly in that. But anyhow, we'll keep going here, the next one, because of our time. And so we come to a friend. And we come to a friend named Hushai. Now, I've talked about Hushai here just a little bit. And let's just look just for a moment. We can't read all the verses, even though I encourage you maybe to go back and read chapter 16, 17 later. So kind of like the movie goes from David to poof, right over here now to Absalom. And if you remember, Hushai is David's friend. Remember it says in the last verse of chapter 15, hey, I want my friend, I want you to go back. And I need you to go back. I need you to be a spy for me, okay? I need you to be the right kind of counsel to help me. And so look what it says in verse number 15. And Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. That's the main counselor. And it came to pass when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, was come unto Absalom, that Hushai said unto Absalom, God save the king, God save the king. And Absalom said to Hushai, Is this thy kindness to thy friend? Why wentest thou not with thy friend? And Hushai said unto Absalom, Nay, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his will I be, and with him will I abide. And again, whom shall I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son? As I have served in thy father's presence, so will I be in thy presence. And so we see Hushai, who is faithful. Now, it's one thing to go up to your friend in need as he's running for his life and say, hey man, I'm there for you, I'll be there for you, let's get everyone to safety. It's another thing for your friend to say, hey, good, the guy that's trying to kill me, my son, I want you to go back and be a spy for me. That's a little different mission. That's a little different mission than staying with him. And we see here David's friend Hushai here, he's going to Absalom here, and the whole purpose is this. The counselor Ahithophel, I know there's a lot of names here, and I'm just trying to stay with me. Ahithophel was David's main counselor, if you remember. We'll talk about him in just a second. And he has turned on David, and he is helping Absalom. And so David says, I need you, Hushai, to go and to thwart, if you would, Ahithophel's counsel. And what happens is this, and by the way, about him, in fact, that's where you get to chapter 17, and verses 1 through 4 are basically this. Ahithophel comes up with this plan. He tells Absalom, he says, let me tell you what you need to do. In fact, if you look in chapter 17, and we'll come back to some of these other parts here in a moment, but chapter 17, verse 1, it says, Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, Let me now choose out 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David this night. And I will come upon him while he is weary and weak-handed, and will make him afraid. And all the people that are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only, and I'll bring back all the people unto thee. The man whom thou seekest is as if all returned, so all the people shall be in peace. And the saying pleased Absalom well, and all the elders of Israel. So Hushai is faithful because here's what happened. Ahithophel comes up with this idea. Hey, Absalom, your dad is down. Your dad is weak mentally and physically right now. Don't hesitate. Get 12,000 guys. We'll all go. We won't kill anyone else. I myself will kill David by himself. I'll bring everyone else back. Just let us go. And you know what it says? It said Absalom, and you remember it said he turned the hearts of the men of Israel, the people of Israel. They all said, man, Ahithophel is the guy. He is right. Send them, battle there. Let's just kill David, get rid of the problem, and go on. And then you get something great that happens. Hushai, because he's now gotten to the graces of Absalom, says, I got a different idea. Obviously, Hushai could have noticed that Absalom had a lot of things going for him against David. But even in the midst of seeing how overwhelming the odds were going to be against David, Hushai was faithful to his friend David, to his king David. And Hushai, what he does, he convinces Absalom to wait and to not do that, to basically build up the nation first. That's what he says down in verses 5 through 14. 5 through 14 is basically, and we won't take time to read all that tonight, but what Hushai does, he says, instead of going out there and fighting David, why don't you just stay here first, build up your nation first, build up your followers first, let's do that first, and just save the nation first. Just kind of work on that. You don't have to go to David right now. You don't have to do that right now. And by doing that, Absalom actually took took Hushai's advice, and you know what it did? It literally saved the life of David. Hushai saved David's life by convincing Absalom, don't do what Ahithophel said, just wait. In fact, you see, that's what he says. Look down at verse 14 of chapter 17. He says this, and Absalom, this is after he kind of learned everything. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord had appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom. So, there you go. So, Hushai gives his advice, his plan, and ultimately he sways and gets Absalom not to do it. Therefore, he ends up saving the life of David. In fact, it goes on in the next few verses, 15 through 22. If you remember those two priests I was telling you about, Hushai goes and tells them, you need to get a word to David saying, don't sleep, don't sit, don't do anything. Get across the Jordan River. Because if you don't get across the Jordan River, I don't know how soon Absalom will not just say, Ahithophel, go get him. Get over there as fast as you can. Just keep running, keep fleeing, and go there. And some things I had here is this, and I know this is a lot going on in this passage. But something I want us to think about with Hushai here and his faithfulness in being a friend to David, because he literally saved the life of his friend. Okay? And I have this in my notes. Sometimes when we're down, it's hard for us to recognize the people that God sends to us to help us when we're down. Sometimes when we're down and we're brokenhearted, we're so focused on our circumstances that we don't realize the people and things that God sends us to encourage us along the way. And sometimes it's difficult to see that. I've kind of done that before in my life. I've kind of almost prayed this, God, help me through this time. You ever done that? You ever been so overwhelmed by something, so hurting something? Like, God, where are you at in this time? God, I need you to do something. God, this is difficult. I need you to help me through this. Or God, help me meet this deadline, or this or that, the other. And you're just like, God, I need your help through that. And I tell you, I've looked back at certain times, and it's almost like God said, well, I sent so-and-so to send you an encouraging text, but you didn't think nothing of it. So-and-so dropped by and gave you a meal. So-and-so came by and took you out for coffee. That was me. So-and-so sent you a text at a time when you were so upset. That was me. That's what God, I believe, is saying. That's me doing that.
That's right.
And so we don't look at our friends. We don't look at the people that God sends in our life to encourage us. All we're consumed with is the storm that we're in. Let's be honest. we really don't want to know what it feels like to be without God in the midst of our circumstances and trials. I mean, I have things in my life when I'm so bothered and so overwhelmed that sometimes I'll either get a text or I'll see something funny and I'll just laugh. It's almost like God saying, that's me. That's me. That's me getting you to take your eyes off your circumstances and to see and accept the encouragement I'm trying to send you. Let's just be honest. Sometimes we are the hardest people to bless. Right? We want to be a blessing to someone, but sometimes we're the hardest people to bless. Because God will send people to do things, whether it's something small or whether it's something big, whatever it may be. And we're the hardest people for God to bless and to encourage. Because if we're not doing it, then we're consumed with our circumstances. And we ought to sometimes just say, that was God that did that. That was God that had that person that make me laugh. Or God had that person to send me that note. Or to do something like that. Or to show that kindness. Or say something about that. That was God doing that. And sometimes we discount the little things that God does to encourage us. And obviously with Hushai here, it wasn't a little thing. It was a huge thing. But I think sometimes we overlook those things, and it's God's the one that's saying this, I'm here all along. I'm truly never going to leave you or forsake you in this. And then the fourth person, and that's the name we all like to say, right? Ahithophel, right? And I'm probably not saying it right, but that's what I'm going to say, Ahithophel, right? I tried to spell it 5 times. I just took what it says. But there are going to be those people in your life, of friends or enemies. There's going to be those that are going to deceive you. There's going to be those that are going to openly curse you. There's going to be, thank God, those friends that are faithful. But there are going to be those people that betray you. Ahithophel, in my opinion, again, this is just philology, is the Old Testament version of Judas. He's really the Old Testament version of Judas. And when you see Ahithophel here, what does it say happens there in chapter 17? It says that Ahithophel gives all these things he's trying to do, and he's trying to do all this advice, and he's turning on David. In fact, we didn't even take time to go into what he did in chapter 16. One of the first things we read in chapter 16, the last verses 20 through 23, is really a fulfillment of what Nathan the prophet told him that would happen in chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, about how that he would be defied, his enemy would defy with his concubines openly, and all these different things. You can read about that. That's a fulfillment of chapter 12, verses 11 and 12. But what's interesting here is Ahithophel betrays David. He betrays him. To the point that he wants him to what in the beginning of chapter 17? Let me kill him. Let me kill him. And I find something interesting about Ahithophel here, is that after Absalom decided not to follow the counsel of Ahithophel, look what Ahithophel does down in verse number 23 of chapter 17. You want to talk about an emotional guy. And when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his ass and arose and got him home to his house and to his city, and put his household in order, and hanged himself, and died, and was buried in the sepulchre of his father. I find that interesting, that he went home and he killed himself. And Ahithophel, by the way, in case you weren't here with us last week, you might wonder, why is there so much angst between this guy Ahithophel and David? If you remember, Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba. So does he know? Does he not know? We don't really know necessarily. But Ahithophel was a traitor to his king. And so anyhow, we see this. But what I like to do just for a second here as we close, I want us to see just kind of some similarities between Judas and Ahithophel, the betrayer. Okay? Some similarities between them. Between Judas, who betrayed Christ, and Ahithophel, who betrayed David. Both, first I have is this, both were chosen members of a very important group, right? One was on the cabinet, so to speak, of King David. The other one was in the disciples, 12 disciples. And really a factor that really certainly separates David from Christ is this. Christ knew that Judas would betray him, and yet he loved him anyways. and I know I talk about it a lot when we get close talking about Lord's Supper. It always amazes me to know that Jesus knew everything but still got on his hands and knees and washed Judas' feet. That just amazes me. But still, Jesus loved Judas just like his other disciples. Secondly, I have this, both betrayed their masters and went with the crowd. Both betrayed their masters and went with the crowd. In their own ways, Ahithophel and Judas both defected, if you would, from what they thought was the losing team to go to the obvious winning team, right? Judas was not going to stay with Jesus because it seemed like the Romans and the Jews that were in charge, man, they're going to be the winning team. If I stay here with him, then it's not going to work out. And Ahithophel in the same way. And really, sometimes we're tempted to think that numbers mean power, and that's kind of a bad lesson to learn. And just really to understand that. And then the last parallel I have is this, between Ahithophel and Judas, is this. They both betrayed, and they both had the same ending. They both hung themselves. They both killed themselves. When did that happen? When things went wrong. Ahithophel didn't hang himself because Absalom was taking his opinions, his counsel. When he did take his counsel, when things went wrong, he hung himself. And you remember Judas? I believe it's in around chapter 27, I think it was. Judas, when he realized what he had done, you remember he took the money back and there was nothing he could do at that point. Remember, it said he went out and he hung himself. And I kind of like this to kind of consider this thought, if you would, with all of this. Why did Ahithophel betray David when Hushai was faithful? Why did Ahithophel betray when Hushai was faithful? I mean, why did he do that? And I think the answer to that is in 1 Chronicles chapter number 27. Here's the difference between the two. 1 Chronicles 27:33 says this, and Ahithophel was the king's counselor. That's who he was. And Hushai, the Archite, was the king's commander. Another way to interpret that is this, the king's friend. He was the king's friend. All through our passage here, you can read 3 different times. Chapter 15, verse 37. So Hushai, David's friend. Doesn't say counselor. It says Hushai, David's friend. What does Absalom even say in chapter 16, verse 17? Is this thy kindness to thy friend? Why did you not go with your friend? There was obviously a difference there. Ahithophel was a counselor. Hushai was the king's friend. And you say, well, why do you tell us that? Because the reason we sang the song tonight, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, is because of Proverbs 18:24, that in our lives, through the times that we are so down and through the times that we are overwhelmed, can we all be glad to say there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother? Or as John chapter 15, verse 13 says this, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And let's encourage you with this before we pray and go, is that no matter what happens in your life, no matter who rejects you or who humiliates you, thank God, God will never, ever betray you. Even when you can't really see your friends from your enemies. I know we're done, but I encourage you sometime to read a few verses here. Faithful is he that calleth you, who will also do it. And the connection verse is 2 Timothy 2:13. If we believe not, or if our faith fails, yet he abideth faithful, for he cannot deny himself. I just want to encourage you tonight, in the midst, know who your friends are, know who your enemies are. But also in this, realize God will never fail you. Stay faithful to him. Because praise God, as believers, we are on the winning side. And when we don't have any friends in the world, thank God we have the friend that'll never leave us. Let's stand together. Appreciate you being here tonight. Father, I thank you for this time we can be together. And Lord, Lord, I don't know who in this room at this moment may feel like in a David situation, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed. God, those that were close to them may be deceiving them, may be cursing them, may be betraying them. But God, I pray you'd help them in those moments to see who is faithful, who is not. And God, I pray in those moments you would help us to have discernment. You would help us in decisions that we make. They won't be in emotions. And God, I just pray for us that tonight we might just realize when we feel like we have no one, because of Christ we have you. God, we're so unworthy of you. But I thank you, God, that we can call on you at any time. God, I pray you'd help us in that way. Pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you. Thank you for coming.